Hello, everyone, and welcome to Life Edge, because life just doesn't have to be that mediocre. I'm Harold Muliadi, and I'm joined by our co-host, Dr. Susan Nash. All right, let's get into it.
Hi there.
So,
Hi, Harold. Well, I have to laugh.
Yeah.
Because life doesn't have to be mediocre. And we always think, okay, it's going to be better. But today, it's like hit a dismal low in terms of gremlins and audio.
The gremlins have come in full force today. As you can see, something's still not quite right. Well, for one, we lost our guest that we were going to have today. We couldn't get him in properly, and then now you can see there's still some sort of thing going on with Susan's video feed, but we are soldiering on.
Yeah, I thought we could at least talk about the guest that the gremlins devoured today. We were going to have Alexander Rosenfeld. He's with Climate Impact Capital, and I was really excited to have him because it makes me think of some of the things that are going on in the world in terms of investments going into what's called sustainable development. And so, like, he has a fund that it puts money into projects that try to minimize the impact on the climate, specifically in terms of energy.
Yeah, and we've had some guests on before that I think we're doing things that are sort of related to that. Like we had the geothermal organization on Marit Brommer. Yeah, so it's sort of along those lines.
Right, and then a few years ago we had water, and that's one thing that Alexander's company they invest in water solutions, because a lot of the things that are happening today have to do with the ways that people had to deal with all the wastewater from operations. They would inject it, which caused all kinds of issues like earthquakes. But I recently came back from Bolivia, and I participated in a very interesting first international forum on gas and petrochemicals and green fuels. And they had, I was in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, and I was first there when I was 18 years old. And it's kind of an interesting story. I was invited to visit an exchange student family over the summer. So I said, yeah, I accept. And I called and said, hey, great. And my parents said, it's okay. I'm 18. Took a course this summer in Spanish. So it was like literature. It's like I really pushed myself. So I got on the plane, got there. I talked to her on the phone, thought everything was fine. So I called from the airport, and I go, nobody was there. I said, hey, Violetta, hi. I'm at the airport. Oh, which airport? Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz, Bolivia? They had no idea I was coming. And so her parents were really good sports because I was there for 2 weeks.
Bit of a surprise visitor then.
Yeah.
And you might have noticed. At any rate, you might have noticed last week. Susan had on this. I believe is a painted wood necklace that you had from your Bolivia trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Oh, good memory. Yeah. Anyway, it was actually woven cloth, but it looked painted wood.
Woven
and
cloth.
I had matching earrings. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, my first trip too, I came back with all sorts of woven tejidos, so blankets and things that the Chola women wear. And at any rate, I was very excited because in this conference, it was officially sponsored by the National Oil Company and also the Ministry of Hydrocarbons. But President Evo Morales was there at the opening, and he passed like 2 feet away from me, and I was like fumbling with my phone. I totally missed it. I wasn't able to take a photo of him like so close, and that was really disappointing. But I was thinking, like Bolivia, for all the bad press it gets about some, people like being afraid to invest, Santa Cruz is booming, and I was there in June, and also I noticed that there were a lot of women who are there. I guess were there from La Paz, but they were wearing the traditional clothing, the pollera, the long skirt, the puffy skirt, and the derby hats, and I thought that's really cool to have pride. And the thing that yeah.
So they were doing that sort of in the same area that they had the conference, or was that just kind of around?
No, they were part of the conference. They were sitting on the front row. I don't know what they were doing exactly, but maybe they're representing certain segments of the. Because when you get to Santa Cruz, it's more rolling hills and foothills, and it's hot, so it's not like the Altiplano. But the whole goal of this was to attract investment, and Bolivia has really interesting goals for itself. They're in the middle, the heart of South America. Mm-hmm. So if you see South America like this, and anyway, so they have natural gas and they have a lot of pipelines. So right now they're selling their gas to Brazil and Argentina, and they want to sell it to Peru. But what they really want to do is to be kind of the crossroads. So if Ecuador and Peru find a lot of gas, they can sell it to Brazil. Or if Argentina and Paraguay encounter a lot of gas, they can sell it to Peru, but going across Bolivia.
Oh, just trying to kind of make the most of their geographical situation, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of taking a lesson from Gazprom. Gazprom is a big investor in Bolivia. They're the gas, and Russia's been investing heavily. And it's like Gazprom has been extremely effective at producing and transporting gas.
Well, yeah, they've done. Oh, sorry. Well, they've done quite a lot of the laying of the pipelines and planning out all those, all of the distribution and stuff there in Europe, I guess. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, people tend to say, "Oh, well, they use it for diabolical political purposes," and I guess maybe sometimes, but not always. The key is that we look at gas production here in the United States and oil and gas in a completely different way than they do in developing nations, because gas and energy absolutely transform the society and the culture, and they have electricity.
Yeah. So, who was there at the so was it pretty much international in the sense that people from just all over the world were there at the conference, or?
Yeah, it was a great conference. People from all over the world were there. So we had participants, primarily, I'd say, from the neighboring states. There were quite a few nations, rather, nation states. Brazil and Argentina, and some from Peru. But lots of people were there to invest. Then different companies that provided services, a lot of Europeans, and there were also quite a few, again, Russians, and just lots of countries represented. And the thing that was interesting is that when you have gas and not much oil, what do you do with it? So if you don't have a pipeline, what can you do? And so they were talking about, they said petrochemicals. Well, they're really making, how we can make plastics and also fertilizer from natural gas.
Yeah, well, that is one thing that always seems striking to me about the petrochemical industry is, petrochemicals are kind of foundational to basically modern society. Without the products that we have from petrochemicals, pretty much every industry in the world would suffer greatly, if not just totally disappear.
It's true. I mean, and if we could find a way to like move our cars and things and have transportation using different ways of generating energy, if we saved the that for our petrochemicals or the oil for petrochemicals, that would be one thing. It's interesting though because there are a lot of things that they can make with soybeans.
Yeah.
That,
Oh, sorry. Continue.
But then, yeah. So it's interesting too. Like one of the things that they looked at was creating ethanol from sugarcane. Now there's a big ethical dilemma about using ethanol or using sugarcane or corn for ethanol because of the amount of water it takes and also the fact that it affects the food supply. But in this case, there were a lot of local farmers producing sugarcane, and if they had two people to sell it to, not just one, then they could at least have some competition and have options.
Yeah, that is true. And also, I mean, I guess, sugarcane's not quite like corn because, corn, it being a staple product, it's something where if the price of it, for example, in a region shoots up, then there's a lot of people that can't eat, or it's a lot harder for them to eat. Whereas sugarcane, it's a little bit more of a secondary product, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Because I mean, they have this trapiche, and they crush it and they get the juice and they melt it down, boil it down, distill it down into sugar and I guess rum. But I didn't really see any big, or I've never heard of any rum plants in Bolivia. So I think it's a traditional crop, but I think they just use it for sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about biodiesel made of green sources, and also again urea made of natural gas, which can be used. They actually had transportation systems for transporting the urea to the agricultural regions, which are
I didn't
near.
know you could actually synthesize it from gas. That's interesting.
Isn't it fascinating?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are all kinds of opportunities that we don't really think about, and you go to Santa Cruz and it's just booming. I haven't been to La Paz in a number of years, but another country in South America that's restabilized is Peru. Lima is booming as well, primarily because of political stability, which it's amazing how critical political stability is for economic growth.
Oh yeah. I guess, if all the other countries aren't sure what's going to happen, in the next month in the country, then they're not going to want to have too many of their fingers in that.
Yeah.
Unless they get bitten off.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, Argentina has had difficulties with their economy, and I think that they've suffered because I think some of the industries have moved from Argentina to Bolivia and also to Peru, and same with Ecuador. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting. And then I had the week before that I was in Cartagena, Colombia. We had I was participating in a conference that was called Energy Opportunities. And it wasn't exactly the same because it really had a lot more to do with the global sense of socio-political opportunities or conditions and outlooks for different regions. And it was exciting to see. Again, I'd say the hot spot would be Guyana and Suriname and the deep Gulf in the Mexican waters. They found amazing reserves in the deep waters in the Caribbean.
Huh.
Yeah, and so that's, you talk about transforming economies. I mean, Guyana and Suriname and French Guiana and, well, unfortunately, Venezuela is not exactly benefiting from all of that, but also even certain like Jamaica, and then the offshore Colombia in the Caribbean part,
Yeah,
and then where the uh-huh.
I mean, Venezuela, they're not doing well now. For a long time though, their economy was basically relying on their petrochemical reserves. Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, years ago in the 90s, in the late 90s, I got involved with a bunch of several projects with um, USAID and also with World Bank that had to do with avoiding what they called the Dutch disease, which was over reliance on a single commodity, because countries like Venezuela and Nigeria, Azerbaijan, other countries that were Kazakhstan, they were finding themselves to be not diversifying, and they're putting and not even having a rainy day fund, and
Yeah.
it was like the tulips.
Oh,
But the thing that's interesting about it, yeah, and the interesting is interesting about the so-called Dutch disease or the resource curse is that it's not so easy to diversify. Because let's say you say, okay, well, I've got all this money coming in from oil, and okay, it's money, the price is really high right now, so I'm going to invest in doing something like creating fill in the blank, shoe factories.
hmm
Okay, so you do that, and yeah, you have shoe factories, and you make jeans too. You have the jeans factories. You go, okay, we'll just sell them locally. But because you don't have your area of comparative advantage in that, it's going to cost you a lot more. So it's not going to do any good. You'll just have the highest cost
Yeah.
shoes anywhere. So you have to either have, you'll have to have a lot of tariffs or government subsidies for anybody to buy them.
Yeah, and I guess it's like when there's when you've basically only got one industry, then anything happens with that industry, then not only not only does it mess with all the other investors and other countries sort of trust in you being a stable economic partner, but then it just affects the whole economy because they don't have anything else to fall back on.
That's really true. And unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is countries that like this has happened several times. Countries say, well, you know, I don't like being so dependent. I need a little bit more money from this so I can reinvest. So I'm going to say, we need, instead of a royalty of 15%, this needs to be 50%. Well, or we need to nationalize and just take a
Yeah.
step back. And that sounds really good from certain perspectives, but it doesn't work out too well. And alienates partners.
Well, so it sounds like there in Bolivia, what they're trying to do is use use oil and gas industry as something that will sort of help them build up and shore up their other industries as well, like agriculture, like you were talking about sugarcane and stuff like that. So I guess it seems like maybe they're trying to look at what's happened elsewhere in South America and try to plan out a better way for them to build up their economy in a way that's a little more with the future in mind.
I totally agree with that perspective, and I think they're doing it in a really smart way. The reason I'm saying that is that instead of trying to just go out and say build consumer products when the cost per shoe, for example, is going to be $100 a shoe, and they can only sell it for 30 wholesale. I mean, that's not going to do any good. But if they're taking advantage of their resources and the geographical location. I mean, if you look at the history of economic development, it's interesting how many countries became empires primarily through trading because they had seacoasts.
Oh yeah,
And so they,
that's part of what makes us in the United States so well situated and able to situate ourselves well economically is because we've got these huge uncontested coasts.
That's exactly right. And we learned it was, mercantilism. We haven't really gotten away from the idea that trade is really how the prosperity happens. I mean, granted, there has to be ethical trade, and so you have to be careful what you're actually trading and
Hmm.
how the labor is getting done, et cetera, and how the products are being produced and what they are. Um, but that said, you're right. It's a good point about the uncontested coasts.
Yeah. And I kind of feel like, that's probably part of why, for example, Russia having been like a superpower before, part of the reason, other than political reasons and that sort of thing, why they ended up kind of weaker economically is because a lot of their trade had to be done over land, whereas, they have ports, like, they have ports in the north, but, half of the year they're frozen, so they can't even use them.
Well, that's true, and that's one of the reasons why Turkey has always been so important for them in the Black Sea,
Hmm.
and being able to have a coast in the Adriatic. So, okay, so I have a question for you, Harold. Would
Yeah.
you consider yourself a millennial?
Consider myself a millennial? Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah. I mean, I know everybody hates labels. I don't like labels, but
Yeah.
how do you feel about the future? Are you optimistic?
I don't know. I would say I'm pretty optimistic. I always feel like, just looking at the past, it seems like people are always saying world's going to end tomorrow kind of thing. For whatever
Yeah,
reason,
definitely.
for a some sort of natural man-made reason or political reason, anything, people are always saying we're going to blow ourselves up, world's going to end, that kind of thing. But I feel like in the end, things tend to kind of work out. I mean, it can be argued that, people can say, oh, everything is going down and such, but I feel like I'd rather, I don't think there's another point in history that I would rather be than now.
Yeah, can you imagine? Like, okay, let's say that you could travel back and you lived, say, in the 1920s, or like, let's say 1918. Like,
Hmm.
I was walking around looking at are you familiar with those older homes that they're like the craftsman houses and the four square
Oh,
houses?
that's weird. Yeah, somewhat.
Yeah, like the ones that are built in like okay. So do you remember how Henry Ford? It just occurred to me, like, you remember how Henry Ford um, changed the way of building cars
Yeah.
by having factories? Yeah. Well, then it became really popular to apply that to everything. So
Hmm.
I was just looking at it. I'm fascinated by older houses, and I was looking at it at these historical catalogs. You could order an entire house and just like write your check, and they'd send it to you. And it wasn't a mobile home. It was called Foursquare or Craftsman, and then it would just come as a kit, and they weren't small.
I guess that
Have you seen
tends to
those
happen
houses?
when we have a new technology or kind of a new way of doing things, and people get so excited about it, and then it's everywhere, and people think that it's the solution to everything, right?
Yeah, it's a good point.
I think though that if I were transported back to 1918, I'd probably just die of fatal internet withdrawal. I wouldn't be able to navigate. I wouldn't be able to, I'd be trying to look stuff up and just realize, wait, that doesn't even exist.
What do you do? A lot of games?
Um, a little bit. I mean, I used to a lot, like probably way too much, but now not as much. But yeah,
Do you ever watch PewDiePie?
I've seen him. I I haven't like seen a whole lot of his stuff.
I just watch him occasionally because I think, how can somebody have like 100 million followers or whatever, whatever it is?
By
They're
making
just
funny
watching.
faces and screaming.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And like, so yesterday you were talking about like different memes. I was just going, these are pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I guess I don't totally understand. People watching all his videos and stuff like that. I I respect him though. Like for what he's done, he's it's yeah, he's become enormously popular doing something that before people realized that you could get that many people watching you just doing what he did, they would have said, what are you doing? You're wasting your time.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's really great to have so much oh uh, freedom to create whatever whatever it is in the space, and like do whatever you can to encourage people to follow you, even if it's like with outlandish random ideas about conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
I mean, the more random the better, I guess. But um, what do you think about the internet censorship
I
as a millennial?
I always
Speak for all
felt
the
like
millennials.
there
What do you
should
think
be
about e-platforming?
I always felt like there should be, just in general, less censorship, because I don't know, I feel like we're building up this culture of people getting too offended by things that they hear or see. And I mean, and this is an issue that gets really politicized, but I really think that it's kind of everyone nowadays is just getting too sensitive and having this. There's kind of two components of this. One of them is censorship, silencing people, making it so that people won't hear things that they don't like. And then there's also just that now we kind of have this unprecedented capacity to be able to just seek out these communities that only have people that agree with you. That's why, I always hear about people blocking people on Facebook. I don't actually use Facebook that much, but I've never blocked anyone on Facebook or Twitter, because I don't want to put the thing into this sort of machine that says, oh, this is what Harold wants to hear, this is what Harold likes, and shut him off to things that he doesn't like, because I just feel like that's kind of, I don't know, it's a little scary to me, thinking that people are getting more and more kind of encapsulated in bubbles. I'm not totally sure what effect that's going to have, but I think it's getting more and more pronounced, because there's things like, I mean, services like Google or Amazon and other related things are doing they're basically mining off of everything you do to figure out what advertisements to show you, what things will you buy, what things will you search for. So you search for something and it's going to come up with things that are sort of weighted more towards what you've preferred in the past. And in a way it's good, because it's like, oh, it's personalized, it's supposed to be almost reading your mind in a way, but it's also, I feel, kind of doing this to people.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's like talking about clipping your wings. I mean, you can't fly any place if they're just going to put or run any place if you just put the same old Nikes on you.
Yeah.
If you have limited options and limited ideas, I agree with that. It's funny though, because I remember, I sometimes think that some of the sea changes that had to do with like hippies and all that stuff. I mean, like, okay, it had this bohemian, and it came with an entire philosophical stance, mm-hmm. and then then people started reimagining and re-envisioning, and thinking, okay, and I was thinking, okay, was that really good? And like, do we want? I mean, where are those limits? I mean, you don't want to have beheadings and stuff on YouTube, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I guess myself, I kind of tend toward more. It's a lot of it's just the way I was brought up, where I tend towards just seeing everything, and then just letting people decide for themselves what do they look at and when they just decide not to look at. But yeah, I do understand that there's plenty of things that people don't want to see, and it's gonna kind of mess up their day or whatever if they see it. I'm not sure what the best solution is, because there is the just kind of, filtering things out and making sure people don't see things. But
well, it's also thinking about brain chemistry is really addicting. Oh, there we go. Here's our time is up.
yeah.
So, Harold, what has given you an edge in life?
I think the thing that's given me an edge is, it's actually pretty appropriate with what we were just talking about. I feel like I try to, obviously I don't do it perfectly, but I try to listen to everyone and try to, I always try to take things into consideration, even if they're, opposing, contradicting, and, sometimes obviously it just ends up making me kind of confused, but sometimes confusion is actually an advantage as well, because it gives you this point where it's making, when you're confused, you're not quite comfortable. You have to keep thinking about things and you have to figure things out.
That's good. I like that. Open-mindedness and free thinking. Very important.
Yeah. All right.
Well, so we have the music that's rounding us out. So like, I like that. To sum it up, confusion is good because it's mediating force.
Sorry, could you repeat that, Susan?
We're ending.
Yeah.
Confusion is good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks,
it's a
Susan.
dialectic.
Yeah, we tune into.
It worked out well.
Yeah. Tune into the show next time to see the show that we were going to have, I guess. I think this went pretty interesting. We came up with some interesting conversations, and you talked about your time in Bolivia.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to put together some show notes.
All right. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks. Bye.
All right, bye. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in and watching us. We'll see you again next time on Life Edge. Bye now.